Hello coaches, I hope you're enjoying the World Coaching Conference 2025. I'm Kerno Pirbai Clark, National Para-Badminton player in SL3 and badminton coach for England. Your next speaker is Ilona Alberca, Doctor of Biomechanics and Sports Science at the University of Toulon. She'll be presenting a biomechanical study of performances and injury risks, including the ergonomics of the wheelchair in para-badminton.
Okay, here it is. So today I'm going to talk about how can biomechanics and research be useful for the wheelchair badminton. So first of all, we're going to start with my PhD, which I did in partnership with the French Badminton Federation at the University of Toulon, and with a French project named Paraperf, aimed at the emerge of medal-winning athletes at the 2024 Paris Paralympic Games. So during this PhD, there was two aims. A scientific one, which was to better understand the biomechanical demands of badminton through field-based measurement, and an athletic one, which was to develop tools to support the physical and both technical preparation for the athletes. So those two aims were divided into three areas of work, which I studied during my PhD. The first one was studying the impact of the racket. The second one was to study the impact of the propulsion direction, and the last one was to study the impact of the classification. But the interest of this PhD was to be able to measure and calculate some performance parameters through field-based tests, non-invasive and quick to set up. So I will now present to you the protocol that I used during this PhD. So we recruited 19 experienced wheelchair badminton during 2 different national championships. And a forward-backward test was conducted during 1 minute on a straight 3-meter lines to represent the movement in a game context, where the movements are primarily forward to backward. The test was conducted under 2 conditions, with and without the use of a racket, and the athletes was using their own racket and wheelchair equipped with 2 inertial measurement units called IMUs on each wheel hub, and it allows us to have some different type of data. And you can see here a little photo. So this is the IMU. And more specifically, you can see here an illustration of the IMUs, which are represented here by the square devices, as well as their positioning on the wheelchair just here. So those tools are very simple, lightweight, and non-invasive tools to use, and you can add it to the wheelchair during both training and into the game. Thanks to these tools, we were able to measure and calculate some propulsion technique parameters here, but also some performance parameters like the sprint time, the velocities, and also the acceleration and the deceleration. So here you have an illustration of what we get, and this is the velocity curve for one participant. In blue, you have the sprint in forward propulsion, and in red, you have the sprint in backward propulsion. You also have the parameters here, like the acceleration for the start of the sprint, the deceleration for the end, and you have also a specific feature from the wheelchair badminton, which is the transition time, and it's basically the time that it takes the athletes to switch from one type of propulsion to another. I will pass for this slide for now. And I will just show you a little video of the athletes doing the test. We can see here, if we look closely, the IMU, but we also add some other tools, like the Vicon. Those are cameras to study the ranges of motion of the athletes. So during my PhD, from a scientific perspective, the research resulted in conferences, publication, and also a doctoral thesis. But from an athletic perspective, which is our main focus here, it allows us to provide some individualized reports for each athlete, including many performance parameters and key indicators. So here you have an example of a report in which we can analyze here the acceleration and the deceleration, and also the maximal velocity, for example, for both backward and forward propulsion during the first 3 pushes. The first 3 pushes are very important into the sport, given the very quick movement the athletes make, and also given the court size. And maybe you cannot see because this is too small, but the athlete here was better in performance in the forward propulsion compared to the backward propulsion. So those kind of analyses make it possible to identify some imbalance between the 2 types of propulsion and can then guide further training to address this deficit. We also followed up different athletes during different time of the years, so we can see if there was improvement in their performance. I also did a lot of video conferencing to explain all of those reports. And here it is another example, but it's in French, I'm sorry, so I will pass for this slide. More specifically, I worked with 2 athletes of the French Badminton Federation who had special concerns. For the first athletes, this included the use of a protective cover on the backrest and what impact can it have on the performance, but also the use of an energy return backrest, and also which one of a transitional movement was more performant when it's about to switch from backward propulsion to forward propulsion. Also, this athlete wanted to transition from 20-inch, 25-inch to 26-inch wheels. And for the second athlete, it was interested into its foot plate or pallet, which was very heavy and wished to have a lighter one. So thanks to the protocols I presented previously, we were able to validate the protective cover of the backrest and also to switch the athlete from the 25-inch to 26-inch wheels. The first athlete also was able to benefit from a second sport wheelchair, partially designed by AirBadminton to improve its lightness. And I had the opportunity to test this wheelchair to validate some adjustments and also to assess its performance. The second athlete, we created a new footrest pallet and installed on the wheelchair. But unfortunately, this pallet broke during a championship, so we had to change it. And now this new footrest pallet reduced the total weight of the wheelchair and allowed the athlete to position their knees at a 90-degree position to avoid blocking their trunk movement. So here you can see a photo of the second sport wheelchair for the first athlete. So this is a very lightweight wheelchair and also very adjustable, which is not the case for many of the sport wheelchair. And you can see here the energy return backrest with some elastic bands, which is a special feature of this athlete. I also had an intern during my PhD who did a lot of video analysis, but it's quite basic into the sport, so I will pass also this slide. And to go further, my research focused on closely the athletes, providing them with individualized reports, but also answers some of their questions. But my research looked like at the process of classification in the wheelchair badminton, which is relatively new given the recent creation of this sport and its equal recent inclusion into the Paralympic Games since Tokyo 2021. So in the wheelchair badminton, we have two classification. The wheelchair 1 athletes, which are basically the athletes with no or little abdominal capacities, and the wheelchair 2 athletes, which are the athletes with abdominal capacities. The classification process includes medical and physical assessments, sport-specific tests, and also an observation on the on-court and the practice. But there is no biomechanics data or quantitative data into this process. So my idea was maybe if we can add some quantitative data to this process, we may be able to strengthen the classification process. So that's what I did. I grouped the participants randomly into based on their performance parameter using a statistical method. And I thought I was going to get two groups or two clusters as the classification, as the reflect of the actual classification. But as you can see, I get three clusters. So one in green, one in orange, and one in purple. So that was against our initial hypothesis and against the actual classification. And if we looked at the composition of the cluster, you can see that the cluster 1 is mostly composed with wheelchair 1 athletes, and for the cluster 2 and 3, they are composed with both mixed wheelchair 1 and wheelchair 2 athletes. So we searched for an explanation of those three clusters, and we had a potential explore factory, the years of experience, because it may be one of the factors behind the creation of three clusters. So we divide the athletes into three categories: less experienced wheelchair players, experienced wheelchair players, and very experienced wheelchair players. Doing this, we saw that the cluster 1 was mostly composed of the less experienced wheelchair player, and the cluster 3 was mostly composed by experienced to very experienced wheelchair player. So the point is, adding some performance parameter here highlights three clusters, and it will indicate the need to maybe involve the current classification towards a classification with three classes. But the results in this study needs to be interpreted with caution, since we use performance parameter, and we know that performance can vary for various reasons, both intrinsic and extrinsic reasons. So, as it's already the case in the wheelchair basketball, maybe it will be more interesting to have some functional data from the trunk movements, for example. And then we can go and move toward evidence-based classification, which is recommended by the International Paralympic Committee, and either confirm the current classification or develop it further. Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name's Carrie and I'm from New Zealand. I was just wondering, with the chair wheel sizes, is there any data to know that 25 is better than a 26?
Is the 25 better than the 26-inch? Is that your question?
Yes.
Not really. It depends on the impairment of the athletes. Most of the time, when you're playing wheelchair badminton, you add a paraplegia, but you can have a high paraplegia or low paraplegia. And given this disability, you are going to use 25-inch wheels or 26-inch. It depends on how much you need to be close to the wheels to propel them. But in the case of this athlete, it was the last one in 25-inch, and he wanted to try the 26-inch. So at first I was against the idea because it needs a lot of muscular changes to be able to propel the wheelchair, and also we needed to I don't know how to say this, but to load the seat, I don't know, So it can make possible to propose them. So it know better, but the athlete wanted to try it. And at the end, with some changes, it was more efficient with those wheels.
Great, thank you for your question. Thank you, Ilona, very much. A round
Thank
of
you so
applause,
much.
please.